farmer was fixing his tractor when the ground beneath him suddenly collapsed. Under a thin layer of soil, he discovered a rusted door leading deep beneath his land. What he found below changed everything he believed about his family. Watch until the end and comment what you would do in his place. Subscribe and like to uncover the truth. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden beams across the rolling fields of Elias Grayson's farm, turning the dry grass into a sea of bronze and dust. It was the kind of light Elias had known his entire life, the kind that marked the slow end of another working day. He stood in the yard with his hands on his hips, sweat clinging stubbornly to his temples, staring at his tractor with the familiar mix of irritation and resignation that came from years of fixing the same old machines again and again. Farming was not gentle work. It demanded patience, strength, and an acceptance that nothing ever truly stayed fixed for long. Fences broke, engines failed, animals got sick, and the land itself tested you constantly. Elias had inherited not just the farm, but that understanding. The soil beneath his boots felt as familiar as his own hands, cracked and calloused from decades of labor. This land had belonged to his family for generations, passed down quietly, without ceremony, as if it had always been waiting for him. His grandfather, Dr. Samuel Grayson, had once owned every acre Elias now worked. The stories about Samuel were part of Elias's childhood, told softly during long winter evenings. A respected doctor, a man with steady hands and a calm voice, someone people trusted with their lives. And then, suddenly, a man who walked away from medicine without explanation and became a farmer instead. No one ever spoke about why. The family treated it as a closed chapter, something not meant to be reopened. Elias had learned early that curiosity did not keep cattle fed or roofs repaired. Questions were luxuries. Survival was practical. And yet, as he wiped his brow and glanced across the quiet yard, a strange feeling crept into his chest, subtle but persistent, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He climbed onto the tractor, turned the key, and listened to the familiar rumble of the aging engine. The vibration traveled up through the metal frame and into his bones, grounding him in routine. He eased the tractor forward, planning to move a stack of hay bales closer to the barn before nightfall. Halfway across the yard, everything changed. The ground lurched violently beneath him. The tractor jolted forward with a sudden, brutal force, slamming Elias against the steering wheel. His heart leapt into his throat as the rear wheels spun uselessly. He killed the engine instantly, the sudden silence ringing louder than the noise that had come before. Dust rose into the still air, hanging there unnaturally, as if time itself had paused. "What the hell?" Elias muttered as he climbed down. One of the tractor's rear tires had sunk deep into the ground, swallowed halfway by a jagged crack in the soil that had not been there hours earlier. The earth around it looked wrong, too loose, too disturbed. Elias crouched and brushed dirt away with his hands. His fingers struck something hard almost immediately. Metal, not stone, not wood, not an old pipe or buried equipment. Flat metal, cold and solid, hidden just beneath the surface. A slow unease settled into his stomach. He scraped away more soil, working carefully, revealing the edge of a wide, rusted surface stretching farther than any buried junk should. The shape was too deliberate, too precise. The dirt around it seemed intentionally packed, as though someone had worked hard to make sure nothing above betrayed what lay below. Elias leaned back on his heels, breathing slowly. The farm around him looked unchanged. The barn stood quietly in the distance. The cattle grazed lazily near the fence line. The wind carried the familiar smell of earth and animals. Everything was normal, and yet nothing was. He fetched a crowbar from the tractor and returned to the spot, his movements cautious now. He slid the tip of the bar into a narrow seam between the metal and the soil, and pried. The ground resisted, clinging stubbornly to whatever secret it protected. Then, with a sharp metallic creak, something shifted beneath his feet. The sound echoed hollowly from below. Elias froze. That echo did not belong to solid ground. It belonged to empty space. He worked faster, adrenaline replacing fatigue as more of the object emerged. A hinge, a handle. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It was a door, a massive rusted steel door buried beneath the center of his farmyard. He stepped back instinctively, wiping dirt from his hands, his heart pounding hard enough to make his ears ring. Doors were meant to be seen, meant to be used. Someone had hidden this one deliberately. Questions flooded his mind faster than he could organize them. Why here? Why underground? Who built it? And when? His thoughts drifted uninvited to his grandfather. Samuel Grayson had owned this land since the 1940s. Had he done this? Had the quiet doctor, the man remembered for healing, built something like this beneath his own home? The idea unsettled Elias more than he wanted to admit. He knelt again and wrapped his fingers around the rusted handle. It was cold, heavier than expected. He pulled. Nothing. He braced one foot against the ground and tugged harder. The metal shifted barely an inch, releasing a deep, hollow thump from below that vibrated through the earth like a slow heartbeat. Elias let go immediately, breath locked in his chest. That sound did not feel empty. It felt contained. A warning whispered through his mind, primal and insistent, telling him to stop, to leave it alone. Storm shelters existed, he told himself. People built them during wartime, during seasons of fear. This could be nothing more than that. But storm shelters were marked, known, accessible. This was sealed, hidden, forgotten on purpose. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the yard until they pointed toward the door like dark fingers. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. Even the wind had died. He wasn't going to open it tonight. Backing away slowly, he kept his eyes locked on the hatch, half expecting it to move on its own once he turned his back. The tractor remained stuck, its tire trapped in the earth above the hidden structure. But Elias no longer cared. Something far heavier than machinery occupied his thoughts now. As he walked toward the house, a chill crept up his spine. The door had been buried, sealed, concealed with care. Someone had not wanted it found. For the first time in his life, Elias looked at his family land not as a place of inheritance, but as a place of secrets. Inside, the lights flickered on warmly, but offered no comfort. He washed the dirt from his hands, though the feeling of rust and soil seemed to linger, no matter how much he scrubbed. Standing at the kitchen window, he stared out at the yard as dusk swallowed the fields. The farm looked peaceful again, but Elias knew better. Beneath that calm surface lay something metal, something hidden, something waiting. And as night settled over the land, an unsettling certainty took root inside him. Whatever lay beneath his feet was not finished with him yet. The crack in the ground had already begun to open the past. Elias did not sleep that night. The image of the rusted door beneath his yard replayed endlessly behind his closed eyes, each time heavier, closer, as if the earth itself were pressing its memory into him. When dawn finally arrived, it brought no relief. Gray clouds hung low over the fields, muting the colors of the farm and casting the world in a dull, restless light. It felt as though even the sky was waiting. He rose before the alarm, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of damp soil. The tractor still sat crooked in the yard, its wheels swallowed by the broken ground, silently pointing toward the place where the door lay, hidden again beneath loose dirt. Elias crouched and brushed the soil away once more, revealing the rusted steel surface exactly where he had left it. Up close, the door felt older than he had first realized. Time had eaten into the metal, carving deep scars of corrosion. This was not something built recently, not some careless mistake left behind by strangers. This thing had been waiting for decades. He went to the barn and returned with a heavier pry bar, his grip tight, his jaw set. Fear still whispered inside him, but curiosity pressed harder now, fueled by a need he could no longer ignore. He wedged the bar under the edge of the hatch and leaned his weight into it. The hinges screamed. The sound tore through the quiet morning like a wound opening. Elias flinched but did not stop. With a final violent groan, the door broke free, lifting just enough to reveal a dark shaft below. A rush of cold air burst upward, carrying a smell that made his stomach twist. It was not the smell of earth alone. It was stale, chemical, faintly antiseptic. Elias stepped back, heart pounding, then leaned forward again, peering into the darkness. A ladder descended into the ground, its rusted rungs disappearing into blackness. He retrieved his flashlight and shone it down. The beam caught brick walls and the faint outline of a floor far below, but nothing more. Every instinct told him to leave. Instead, he placed one boot on the first rung. The ladder creaked under his weight, a fragile, complaining sound that echoed far too loudly. He descended slowly, each step deliberate, each breath shallow. The cold wrapped around him as he went deeper, clinging to his skin like damp cloth. The smell intensified, thick with age and abandonment. When his boots finally touched solid ground, Elias stood in a small rectangular room lined with brick. Dust floated lazily in the flashlight's beam, disturbed for the first time in years. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to feel. Then his light shifted. A metal hospital bed stood against the far wall. Elias froze. The frame was rusted, but unmistakable. Its shape burned into his mind instantly. Leather straps hung limply from both sides of the headrest, cracked with age but still intact. The mattress was gone, leaving only a sagging wire mesh beneath. Nearby, a metal tray held surgical instruments. Scalpels, forceps, syringes, dull with grime, yet chillingly precise. This was not a storm shelter. His breath quickened as the beam moved across the room. Shelves lined one wall, filled with amber bottles, some unlabeled, others marked with faded handwriting. Elias felt a jolt of recognition run through him as he leaned closer. The handwriting was his grandfather's. He had seen it before, in old letters and family documents. The same careful curves, the same looping G in Grayson. His chest tightened painfully. Elias backed away, the weight of realization pressing down on him. Had his grandfather done this? Had Samuel Grayson, the man remembered as a healer, worked in secret beneath his own land? He climbed out quickly, lungs burning as he emerged into daylight, gasping as if he had surfaced from deep water. The yard felt too open now, too exposed. He shut the hatch, but the image of what lay below burned brighter with every second. That night the house felt wrong. Every creak of wood made him tense. Shadows lingered too long in corners. He tried to distract himself with the television, but the artificial laughter grated against the memory of rusted straps and silent instruments. His grandfather's face haunted him, memories colliding violently with what he had seen. By morning, doubt had turned into resolve. Elias began searching the house. He moved through storage rooms and closets, opening boxes untouched for years. Old photographs, newspaper clippings, letters tied with twine. Slowly a pattern emerged. His grandfather had not simply walked away from medicine. He had been forced out. Letters spoke of unauthorized practices, patient intake violations, and non-compliance with policy. The tone shifted from respectful to threatening. Then came the final notice: termination of medical privileges. Elias sat heavily, heart racing. The deeper he dug, the more the picture changed. Photographs showed people his grandfather had treated after leaving the hospital. Men, women, children, all black. Many bore handwritten notes on the back. Refused treatment. No payment required. Stabilized. The truth settled slowly, painfully. The underground room was not built for cruelty. It was built because the world above had closed its doors. By the time Elias returned to the hatch that afternoon, his fear had transformed into something sharper, more focused. He descended again, this time with steadier hands. The room felt different now, less threatening, more solemn. His flashlight landed on a tall metal cabinet against the wall. It was locked. The sight of it sent a familiar chill through him. Whatever his grandfather had hidden there had been important enough to seal away even here, in secrecy. Elias reached out, fingers hovering over the cold metal, knowing this was only the beginning. The room had given him answers, but it had also raised far more questions than he was ready for. And somewhere in that locked cabinet, the past waited to speak. Elias stood in the underground room longer than he realized, the beam of his flashlight resting on the locked metal cabinet as if it were a living thing watching him back. The room no longer felt like a threat, but it did feel heavy, saturated with decisions made under pressure and silence. Whatever his grandfather had hidden here was not meant to be forgotten. It had been sealed away deliberately, protected from time, judgment, and fear. He returned to the surface only long enough to retrieve tools. The walk back to the house felt unreal, as though he were moving through a version of the farm that no longer belonged entirely to the present. Everything above ground looked unchanged, but Elias knew now that the land held layers, like a body bearing scars beneath unbroken skin. When he descended again, bolt cutters in hand, his heart pounded with a steady, deliberate rhythm. He paused at the cabinet, resting his palm against the cold metal. For a brief moment, he wondered whether opening it was a betrayal. Then he thought of the faces in the photographs, of the names written carefully in his grandfather's hand, and of the people who had come here with nowhere else to go. The lock snapped loudly, the sound echoing off the brick walls like a final judgment. Inside the cabinet were folders, dozens of them, each one thick, sealed, labeled with a name and a date. Elias pulled one free and opened it carefully. The contents were meticulous: medical notes, treatment plans, recovery observations, and a final page stamped with words that made his breath catch. Discharged, relocated for safety. He stared at the phrase, then at the signature beneath it. Samuel Grayson. Elias opened another folder, then another. The stories varied, but the pattern remained the same. Patients turned away from official clinics, injuries ignored, illnesses dismissed. His grandfather had taken them in, treated them in secret, then helped them disappear into safer places where they would not be hunted, questioned, or denied care again. The realization hit him with quiet force. This was not a hiding place, it was a passage. His grandfather had not only healed bodies here, he had protected lives. As Elias worked through the folders, his hands began to tremble. Each file represented risk. Each act of care had brought his grandfather closer to losing everything. The deeper Elias read, the clearer it became why Samuel had abandoned public medicine. He had not chosen to stop being a doctor. He had chosen to become one in defiance of the world that told him who deserved to live. At the back of the cabinet, beneath the folders, Elias found a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth by time, the name Samuel Grayson, barely visible. He opened it gently. The first entry was dated shortly after the termination of his medical license. "If I cannot heal in the light," it read, "I will heal in the dark." Elias swallowed hard and kept reading. The journal chronicled nights spent operating by lantern light, the fear of discovery, the constant shortage of supplies. Samuel wrote of raids in nearby towns, of patients arriving terrified, injured, and silent. He wrote of holding hands during procedures, of whispering reassurance when pain overwhelmed fear. And slowly, the tone of the entries changed. There were mentions of sickness, a fever that did not behave as expected, symptoms that spread too quickly. Samuel wrote of isolating one patient to protect the others, of experimenting carefully, desperately, with limited tools. His handwriting grew uneven, the lines pressed harder into the page. "I am afraid," one entry confessed. "Not for myself, for them." Elias reached the last written page. "I have done all I can. Should this place ever be found, I pray the one who stands here understands. We did not hide monsters. We hid the persecuted." The remaining pages were blank. Elias closed the journal slowly and pressed it against his chest, his vision blurring. Pride and grief collided inside him, inseparable now. His grandfather had been braver than Elias had ever known, and lonelier than he could have imagined. As he returned the journal to the cabinet, something caught his eye at the bottom. A smaller compartment. Another lock. His pulse quickened. This lock was easier to break. When it fell away, Elias opened the compartment and found several items wrapped carefully in cloth. He unwrapped the first and froze. A photograph. It showed his grandfather kneeling beside a small hospital bed. On it lay a young girl, frail, tubes running from her arms, her face pale but peaceful. Elias knew the name before he turned the photo over. Emily, his aunt. The child his family had spoken of only in whispers. The girl who had died young of a fever no hospital could treat in time. His breath broke. Emily had been here, beneath the farm. His grandfather had brought his own blood into the dark when the light had failed her. The weight of it nearly crushed him. This was the final piece, the truth that explained everything. Samuel Grayson had not been hiding from shame. He had been hiding from a world that forced him to choose between his oath and his obedience. Elias sank onto a crate, the photograph shaking in his hands. The underground room no longer felt oppressive. It felt sacred. A place built from love and defiance, from hope carried against impossible odds. When Elias finally climbed back toward the surface, he moved slowly, carefully, as if leaving a grave. The daylight above greeted him softly, and for the first time since the discovery, he did not recoil from it. The truth had changed him, but it had also given him a purpose. His grandfather's story could not remain buried, and Elias knew now that uncovering it would demand courage of his own. Elias stood alone in the yard as dusk settled over the farm, the sky bruised with shades of purple and fading gold. The hatch lay closed beneath a thin layer of soil once more, but it no longer felt like a threat beneath his feet. It felt like a responsibility. The past had revealed itself not as something monstrous, but as something unfinished. He did not rush to act that night. For the first time since the discovery, he allowed himself to breathe. The house still felt quiet, but no longer hostile. The silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of secrets, but the silence of something waiting to be spoken aloud. Inside, Elias spread the documents across the dining table with deliberate care. Patient files, photographs, letters. The journal lay at the center, its worn cover catching the light of the lamp above. He read the final entry again, slowly, letting each word settle. "We did not hide monsters. We hid the persecuted. The weight of that sentence pressed into him. His grandfather had made a choice that cost him everything, his career, his standing, his safety, and had carried that burden alone until his death. Elias understood now why the farm had always felt different, why Samuel Grayson had lived quietly, never seeking recognition or forgiveness. He had not believed the world was ready to hear the truth, but Elias believed it was time. The following morning, he gathered everything he could safely move: copies of records, photographs protected between sheets of cloth, the journal wrapped carefully as if it were fragile bone. He did not take everything from the underground room. Some things belonged there still, preserved in place until they could be handled properly, with respect. There was one person he trusted to help him do this the right way. Dr. Celeste Bennett arrived in the early afternoon, her car kicking up dust as it rolled into the yard. She stepped out slowly, eyes already scanning the land with the instinct of someone trained to notice what others overlooked. Elias did not explain much at first. He simply led her toward the place where the ground had once broken open. When he uncovered the hatch and guided her down the ladder, her expression shifted, not to fear, but to solemn recognition. She moved through the room slowly, touching nothing at first, observing everything. The bed, the instruments, the shelves, the cabinet Elias had emptied. "This isn't cruelty," she said quietly at last. "It's resistance." Elias handed her the journal. She read in silence, page after page, her brow tightening, her breath slowing. When she reached the entry about Emily, she paused, then closed the book gently. "Your grandfather was erased," she said. "Not because he was wrong, because he challenged who the system allowed to be human." Above ground again, the afternoon sun felt warmer than it had in days. They sat at the table together as Elias laid out the evidence, explaining what he had found and what he feared. Fear that the story would be dismissed, fear that it would be twisted, fear that bringing it into the light would invite resistance. Celeste listened carefully, then nodded. "We start carefully," she said. "Documentation, preservation, verification. We let the facts speak, and when they do, they'll be louder than any attempt to bury them again." They planned methodically. The underground room would be preserved as a historical site. Records would be archived. Names would be restored where possible. The story would begin locally, then expand outward. Not as scandal, but as truth. When Celeste finally left, the farm felt different again, but not empty. Purpose settled into the land like roots finding water. That evening, Elias placed Emily's photograph on the mantel. He stood there for a long time, imagining the life she never had, the life his grandfather had fought for her to have. He understood now that even the greatest courage could not save everyone, but it could save many. Standing by the window, Elias looked out across the fields, stretching into the dark. The farm was no longer just soil and labor and inheritance. It was a witness, a testament to quiet bravery carried out beneath the surface when the world refused to see. "I'll finish what you started," he said softly, not to the house but to the land itself. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the sound away. The hatch beneath the soil remained closed, but its purpose had changed. It no longer guarded a secret meant to die underground. It guarded a truth that had finally found its voice. The past was no longer buried, and this time it would not be silenced again. The truth buried for decades has finally come to light. But how many stories like this are still hidden forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you believe these stories deserve to be told, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery.